Hi, I'm Mike, and today we're working on this 2014 Ford Escape. It has a 2.0 engine and it's two-wheel drive. The problem that it's having is it's due for back brakes. The rotors are bad and the pads are pretty much worn out. In addition to changing those components, we're also going to be flushing the brake fluid system. Okay, first thing you want to do is get your vehicle up in the air, supported with jack stands. Get the tire off. The first step that I think we need to do is get this clip off. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get that off. Try these vice grips. Sometimes these are kind of hard to get off. A little penetrating oil might help. We got pry bar. Maybe not. A little persistence pays off in this case. So the brake pads that we actually got for this vehicle did not come with these, so we're going to reuse these little rattle clips. Alright, so the next step would be to remove these caps so we can gain access to these caliper bolts here. So I just use a tool like this to kind of pry these little caps off. They come off fairly easy. Just like that. These bolts are actually Allen head. It's a 7mm Allen wrench. So I'm going to use this to get it off. If you have a hard time getting the bolt out, you can just take some type of tool like a screwdriver or whatever and just push on that bolt, and then you can pry on it once you get it out. Now you can just pull it with your fingers just like that. Same thing on the bottom one. Just like that. Okay. Now the caliper needs to be removed, but to give me a little bit more wiggle room with these parking brake cables and this brake hose here, I'm going to remove this, and this just looks like it just slides out like this. Just held on with that grommet. Just pull it out. This is an 8mm headed bolt. That'll give me a little bit more wiggle room. You may need like a pry bar or some type of tool to get this thing separated. Just like that. Then we can set it off to the side for the meantime. Okay, so the next step is I'm going to remove this caliper bracket. It's held on by two 13mm hex head bolts. I'm going to try to get it off with this air ratchet. can see, these pads are pretty much worn down to nothing. Alright, so the next step is I'm going to take some parts cleaner and just give this stuff a good soaking. I got the brake caliper bracket down there, just soak that down a little bit. Just like that. Okay, so the next step is these calipers actually have the parking brake integrated into the caliper assembly itself. So in order to compress this piston, you actually need to turn it clockwise in. So you may need a special tool like this. If you don't have something special, you could use needle nose pliers. Just stick them in those two holes there and turn that as you're pushing in, and keep turning until you see that it's compressed all the way. So I'm gonna try this and see how it works for me. This tool doesn't seem to be fitting in there exactly right, but see if it works. May have to tap it in a little bit. Alright, so what I did was actually tap this piece in a little bit real softly, and then, so I can get a better grip on that. Okay, compressing this piston actually gave us a little bit of trouble. I think what happened was because the brake pads were so worn out that the threads on the piston actually came out too far. So in order to get it back in, it took a good amount of downwards force and turning at the same time. Once it caught, it started going pretty quick. When you get it all the way down, it won't stop spinning. It'll just keep spinning and spinning. So this is what it should look like after you got it collapsed, all retracted as far as it would go. Alright, so the next step is we need to remove this rotor. Sometimes they get stuck on there pretty good, especially living in a rust belt like we do here. PB Blaster works great for loosening up frozen parts and rusty parts. Also, I'm going to use an air hammer. It's kind of cheating, but it makes the job go easier. And you could do it with a regular hammer or a dead blow mallet. Works really good, like a 5-pound dead blow mallet. Give it a few good whacks and it usually pops right off. But I'm gonna give it a go with some PB Blaster right in this area. You want to spray some maybe in the wheel studs too. You want to get some back there. Hearing protection is definitely required for this air hammer. Alright, so the next step is I'm going to clean this caliper bracket where the contact points are, where the brake pads ride. So I'm just going to use a wire wheel and this little angle grinder. Take it like this and just go ahead. So where the brake pads actually contact this bracket here, I'm actually putting a little bit of anti-seize. Not a lot, just a little bit. A little bit goes a long way in this case. Definitely doesn't, you don't want this stuff getting onto the friction material of the pads. That wouldn't be ideal. Just like that. This one's pretty much ready to go. Okay, so now that we're ready to install the rotor, I'm going to clean it with some brake parts cleaner and a rag. When they ship these things from the manufacturer, they actually put some type of oil on them or grease. It's like Cosmoline type stuff. So you definitely don't want to install them without cleaning that stuff. So it comes off real easy. And I don't bother cleaning the entire thing, only where the friction material contacts. Just like that. Okay. Alright, now that we got the rotor on, we're ready to install this bracket here. It's held on by these two bolts here. I'm going to use some Loctite on these bolts, blue Loctite. Just a little bit here. It's probably plenty. A little bit on this one. And then just break it in there. Torque these down with a torque wrench. It's about 60 foot-pounds. Good. Alright, so one of the things that I like to do is I like to use this Caliper grease. It's actually a silicone base, high temp formula. I put it where the caliper parts actually contact the brake pads. So I put a little bit here on this piston. And then I also put a little bit back here where these parts contact the outbound pad. A little bit more. I recommend using this instead of the anti-seize on the piston. Sometimes that anti-seize is not compatible with the rubber of this dust boot seal here, and it actually destroys it, deteriorates it. This stuff is because it's silicone base and not a petroleum base. It actually is safe to use on those components. The same thing for the sliding pins. Okay, so the brake pad that actually has this rattle clip installed on it is on the inbound pad. This is where the piston actually compresses on this part of the pad. So that sits here. Slide right in like that, and then this one without the rattle clip actually is the outbound pad, so it just sits in there like this, just like that. So now we're ready to go ahead and put the bolts in. I put the the grease here, the silicone based grease on the sliding pin. One started. I'm going to torque these down to about 20 foot-pounds. The next step is to get these pieces back together. So this rubber thing here, just this grommet just gets pushed into this U-notch in this bracket. The other one actually has a bolt holding it. Right there. Run that in with the air ratchet. Tighten off. Okay, so the final step for completing this portion of the job is installing the spring clip here. It's actually an anti-rattle clip. They can be tricky to get in sometimes. They're kind of hooked and the holes are here, so you want to get one in like that and then try to get the second one in. And then you got to bend these around those tabs up here. And then that one actually fell in place. And then just to be sure, I want to tap on it a little bit. There it goes. Looks pretty good. Yep. And then don't forget about your caps. Alright, so one of the things I forgot to mention was before you compress the piston back into the caliper, you want to make sure you take the cap off of the master cylinder so that the fluid has somewhere to go without making air pressure build up in there. So now we're getting ready to move on to bleeding the brake system. And what I did was I actually sucked out some of the fluid for the master cylinder, then I filled it up with fresh fluid. And now I'm getting ready to bleed it at this wheel here. So the first thing to do is you want to remove this little cap that's on this bleeder screw, which is right here. So just take it off like that. And you're going to want to put a 10mm wrench on it. And then what I'm using this little vacuum brake bleeder. It's good for other uses too. Works quite well. So you can see the brake fluid going through there right now. If I pinch the hose, you can see all the flow of the brake fluid. So I'll let that go for a little while. You want to be sure that you don't let the master cylinder run dry, or else you're going to be bleeding all the brakes again. So yeah, this shouldn't take very long at all. A couple of minutes. The first one that we did actually took a longer time because we wanted to get all that old brake fluid through the master cylinder and everything. But now we got fresh fluid flowing through there. This should only take a few minutes now.
Cap.
So that pretty much concludes this brake bleed. All I gotta do is put the cap back on there. Make sure that the master cylinder is filled to the correct level. I'm gonna put the wheel back on, lower the vehicle back on the ground, and then before I move the vehicle, I want to be sure to pump the brakes. Make sure I build up the pressure because these pistons are retracted right now. So when I hit the brakes, it's really not gonna want to brake until I build that pressure back up. And then after that, I'm going to take it for a test drive, and I'm going to seat these brake pads. So there's a little procedure for that I like to do also. What I do is I drive like 20 miles an hour or so, and I slow down, and I do that a couple of different successions, and then I hit the brakes really hard, and that really seats them in. And I think it's called burnishing. So that's what I like to do, and it seems to work out pretty well. This job is not really difficult, and I think pretty much any home mechanic can do this job. Just take your time, just double check everything, make sure everything looks good when you're done, and that's it. Good luck.